on Labange relative to including in the 2009-10 legislative program support for any plan by the LUSD board or superintendent to implement a mandatory district-wide school uniform policy. Before you, council member, is a report from the CLA's office on this item. There was a motion. We are recommending adoption of the resolution by Weezar Han Labange to include in the city's 2009-10 state legislative program support for the LASD board and superintendent to implement a mandatory district-wide school uniform policy. Currently, they do have a school uniform policy that does allow them to implement a district-wide school uniform policy if they so choose to. Back in 2008, at one of their public safety committee meetings, they established a working group to review implementing such a policy. As of April 23rd, 2009, the working group has met a couple of times, and they plan to present their report to the board by the end of this calendar year. If you have any questions.
Is there legislation pending in the...
Not that no, there is no legislation pending on this item that we're aware of.
So, is it...
It was actually...
Is it common for us to support something that doesn't exist?
We are simply supporting, we would be supporting something.
Yeah, but I don't recall us ever including in our legislative agendas something for which there is no bill. Has that happened?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do that.
You do that?
Yes, we do. You've done that.
Okay.
Okay.
I've done that personally?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then it must be good policy. Then.
It is good policy. What happened originally is that the resolution was brought in by Weezar Han and Labange, supporting the implementation of such a policy. It's a district-wide policy. It has been implemented in a couple of cities throughout the county. It is shown that it increases public safety on school campuses. We've done some research, and in our report you'll see that as the policy reads currently for LAUSD, they can implement a district-wide school uniform policy if they so choose. We're just simply including in our program the support of that. Also, the education code allows for such an action as well.
Okay, here's the problem I'm having.
Okay.
The action before us is whether or not to adopt state legislation. To support state legislation, it says adopt in our state legislative program.
Mm-hmm.
But LAUSD has the authority to do this already.
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, it says adopt the attached resolution to include in the city's 2009-2010 state legislative program.
We're going on record to say if such legislation does come up, we will support it, but we're also supporting the policy.
But the LAUSD has the authority to implement this plan.
Yes.
So I don't anticipate that there will be any legislation.
Right.
Okay.
It says, whereas any official position of the City of Los Angeles with respect to legislation, rules, regulations, or policies proposed to or pending before a local, state, federal government body, agency must have first been adopted.
Councilmember?
Yeah.
Go and point extra city attorney's office. Just look at the second page of the
Now, therefore?
resolution. Yeah, it just basically is including in the city council's legislative program support for any plan by the LAUSD. That's what the language of the resolution says.
But legislation is
Well, it could-
Sacramento.
It's-
I mean, is school board activity legislation?
I don't know what the city council or the authors meant by using the term legislative program, but it appears that the intent of the resolution is to allow the city council to simply support any plan that the LAUSD wants to implement regarding the district-wide uniform policy.
Why don't we just delete the legislative program? I mean, because it's not legislation, and they have the authority to do it without state legislation. If legislation should emerge,
Okay.
we'll reconsider it, but I doubt that any legislation is going, are you representing Mr. Weezer?
Yes, I am.
Are you aware of any legislation that's going to be put in
Not
place?
legislation.
You can have a seat, please.
Not
It makes
legislation
me
per
very
se,
uncomfortable.
but there is a task force looking into this.
Could you
as a
introduce yourself,
policy.
please?
Deanna Kitamura with Councilmember Huizar's
Uh-huh.
office. And there is a task force looking into the policy,
A task force
of an LAUSD task force.
but we don't need it in our legislative program. You just want to go on record as supporting it.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, there is no, I mean,
And we're finding any
LAUSD
amendment-
does not create legislation. I mean, they
We're-
can, but it has to be done in Sacramento. I don't think that's your intent. So, yeah, we just want to delete the section that says include in our legislative program, and just stay on record as saying we support
We're fine with that.
mandatory uniform policies, should LAUSD implement them, or desire to implement them.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, so, we have one, actually, I was stating that because we did get a letter from Joyce Dillard asking that question, and it made sense. Okay, did you want to make a presentation?
Yes, I also have asked the city attorney's office as well as the Partnership for LA Schools to be here.
Okay. Do you really need to make a presentation? I mean, is there any opposition to this? We have two cards, actually. Why don't we take the two cards before we decide?
Sure, but one of them is based on my request for that person to be here, so.
Oh, well, then they should be very brief. One is you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. You don't need a card. Lovett Brooks, Curry, so I assume you are here in support of the item? Okay. Unless Mr. Zine has
What item you on?
reservations. This is to support LAUSD creating a uniform policy for all schools.
To wear uniforms like the police, like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts?
Yeah, right.
I like it.
Yeah. Or Catholic schools or other private schools. Yeah.
Look at city attorney saying, what's our neighborhood council people? We should have for neighborhood council people.
We'll take that into consideration.
I think it's a good idea.
I don't think we're going to have any objection. We have, that's it. It's on our.
Who's going to pay
speaker
for it?
cards.
Did we decide who's paying for it?
Not us.
Has that been determined who's going to pay for it? Pay for the uniforms?
Nothing has decided by LAUSD at this point.
So it'd be district-wide uniforms?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but normally, the kids pay for them.
Well, that's
Well-
true, although they do have programs for.
If you're going to
Selected-
speak, can you
yeah.
speak into the
There you
mic?
go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's true, although they do have some programs that help students defray the cost of the uniforms.
There's not going, the city's not paying for it, though?
No,
Absolutely not.
no.
Okay, good
Yeah,
idea.
yeah. It actually saves money for the family,
Yeah, it does.
yeah.
They can, yes.
Instead of.
And also-
Abercrombie or.
And I also understand that when they develop, if it's approved, that it makes provisions for those who are disadvantaged, where they don't have to pay for the uniform. Somehow they're paid some other kind of way.
Well, someone's paying for it.
So there is a policy pending?
No, I'm saying when the policy is drafted according to the administrative code, the law, it has to make a provision in there that those who are disadvantaged, uniforms are provided to, some kind of way. The school may have a nonprofit donate money or whatever, or
Well,
private.
whatever the system is, even
Yeah.
if it doesn't include that,
Okay.
I don't have a problem supporting it. Mr.
Yes.
Zine moves, and I support making that an action of the committee.
Confuse me?
We did amend it, Mr. Zine, to
It's actually
delete
city's
the
program.
legislative code,
They
legislative
include in the
action,
program
because
just so they
there is no
support.
legislative action pending, and it's nearly a.
This is what.
Okay.
You just took it from what they. Oh, I see. Didn't even.
Okay, item number 2.
Item number 2 is a Bureau of Street Services report in response to motion Gruel Smith relative to issues involved with allowing alternative funding sources, including neighborhood council funds, to substitute for the current private property owner 50% match under the 50/50 sidewalk repair program and related matters.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Councilman Zine. Ron Olive with the Bureau of Street Services. The 50/50 sidewalk repair program has been very successful in the city for the past 4 years. Unfortunately, although it's not going to be funded for this coming year, it's still required that we get council direction on some policy changes that have been proposed. To this point, it's been a pretty firm eligibility requirement that the program is available only to residential property owners, and they have to pay 50% upfront before any construction starts. The subject council motion actually contemplates 3 different changes to the program that I'll outline quickly here. The first is several neighborhood councils have asked if they could use some of their funding to supplement the private property owner's 50% obligation. And we did have, last year, we did meet with Dunn and several neighborhood council representatives to discuss this. And it's our recommendation that this practice be allowed as long as it's a very objective, random lottery type process, and it's done with the appropriate outreach and made available to everyone. The second change proposed is using other sources of city funding to help supplement the 50% property owner's obligation, such as the Street Furniture Revenue Fund, the Real Estate Surplus Fund, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we don't object to that as long as there's an adopted city council motion approving that for each individual case. And third and lastly, the motion recommend or suggests that commercial property owners be eligible to participate in the program in addition to the residential property owners. We would recommend that this not be allowed at this time because each and every year we've had a far higher demand than we have had funding for the program, and we've had waiting lists of 400 or 500 and more every year that we've had to shut out of the program. So it's our opinion that residential property owners have fewer options, fewer resources to affect sidewalk repairs. So we'd like to ask that you keep it open only to residential property owners at this time.
Okay, public comment, Mr. McChristen?
Jim McQuiston. I'm actually on Street Services Task Force on sidewalks. I put in a short statement. Actually, the 50/50 program violates Section 5610. 5610 and the prior section says these are the only ways that you can repair sidewalks, and they say the property owner must pay the entire amount. So if we went 50/50, we're actually giving away public funds, which is really unconstitutional, so we can't do that. Now, the reason why we haven't gotten into this before is people take the money, and they don't sue the city because they're getting public funds. However, there is a Supreme Court decision which said that this is unlawful, and we've just been ignoring it. That's not good practice.
Can I ask a question? Is
Yes.
Is the language of the 5602 prohibitive?
Yes.
Do you have a copy of it?
It's in the state law. I've cited it here.
I trust
Section
you, Mr. McQuiston,
5610.
but I'm questioning the interpretation because I view sidewalks as public thoroughfares, and when they impede the public, we have a responsibility to act.
Yes.
So,
That's also in Section 5610.
But you don't have the document. You don't have the information.
The courts have said that city officials have to know the law, so I don't have to give you a copy of the law. That's also in the body
Well,
of law.
that's a lazy,
But
that's a lazy way
I
to
have
argue your
supplied
point.
these to street services.
So
And-
you invent an argument, you want me to chase down the answer?
No, I'd be glad to give you
Uh,
the
Gwen,
code
could
section.
you tell me, are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
familiar with 5602?
I'm not familiar with, I'm not quite sure what he's citing to, but a couple of years ago, my office, myself included, met with the Department of Street Services and our Public Works attorney, Chris Westhoff. He'd explained that under state law, the private property owner is required to maintain and pay for repairs to the sidewalk, but under our own city ordinance, under our own city charter, the city is assuming responsibility to pay for and maintain the sidewalks. But unfortunately, over the years, the city hasn't had the funds to do so, so I believe that was the genesis for creating the 50/50 program, which allows homeowners to voluntarily agree to pay for part of the repairs to get that repair expedited. But the city's obligation, that our municipal code provides that the city is to pay for the repairs.
Are you saying that the municipal code supersedes state?
No, the municipal code doesn't supersede the state, except that because we're a charter city, not all of the provisions in the government code. I'm not clear what he's citing to. I don't think it's a constitutional provision Mr. McQuiston is citing to.
No,
but we're a charter
he's saying
home
in
ruled
section
city.
5602 of the California Code.
I don't know what that means. The California code includes various subsections, so unless he can cite to the particular government code,
This is in the
supposed to know
Streets
the
and
law.
Highways Code.
Well, I don't
California
know.
Streets and Highways Code.
36 volumes of the
Yeah.
California code without knowing what the actual provision
Let's
is.
say that the Sidewalk Task Force has gone over this pretty thoroughly, and we're going to have another meeting in about, 2 weeks? I think it is 2 weeks. And we're going to hash out this particular issue exactly. And if you want to do anything about this, one way or the other, I would suggest that you just hold this until the committee meets, and maybe you get some more
No,
direction.
I'll tell you
But I'm
what,
sure
we'll
Mr.
send it- We'll send
Pritzker.
it to city council, and if you provide me with the information.
Well, I certainly will. If you want that
I would like to
information,
see
I
it
will
because
definitely
I believe
give
your
it to you.
interpretation is wrong. I believe that the intent was to define who is responsible for it, but not to prohibit us from repairing it if it is a public
No,
safety.
it doesn't
Mr.
prohibit you
McQuiston-
from
Mr.
repairing it.
McQuiston, I'm speaking.
Okay.
And so I believe that it allows us to protect the public when it's a public
Yes.
safety issue.
Yes.
And the evidence is huge because we get sued for
Yes.
people falling on.
And I can explain that if you
Mr.
want.
McQuiston, please stop interrupting.
Okay.
You've had your public comment. And I believe it is our responsibility to try to do something if we can. Apparently, we have an ordinance that takes it even further to say that we've accepted the responsibility for maintaining these, and nobody shot that down. So if that was a problem, I would think somebody could take their issue to the court.
The ordinance does not say that we take responsibility. The ordinance says that we will inspect the sidewalks, and if they need repair, we will send them a notice, and they have the option of repairing it themselves or letting us do it. If we do it, we can add 40% onto the actual cost. So people do it themselves, which is a great benefit to the city.
Okay, but the 50/50 program allows us to get it done, as opposed to them not doing it.
No, we can do it anyway, and then we bill them. That's the difference.
Yeah, we could do that.
We
but
have
then
to.
people
That's
would
the
not
state
pay.
law.
And
If I may, Mr. Chair, in the task force, it's actually still with the city attorney. I believe it's LA Municipal Code Section 62104. Sorry to throw all these numbers at you, but the very end of that section, there's an exception clause that the city adopted in the early 70s, which basically said everything Mr. McQuiston is saying is correct, that state law prevails except in the cases where there's tree root damage, where the sidewalk damage is caused by tree roots. Then the city accepts that, which is 90+% of all the damage. So that's the problematic exception, and that was built in the 70s because there was some federal money coming in.
are
at that
you
time.
saying that the 50/50 program is restricted to tree root damage?
That's mainly the application
No,
we've got.
I'm not saying mainly. Is it restricted or not? I mean, by your own comment, you're saying it should be restricted to tree root damage.
But by practice, we have not restricted it to that, but to my knowledge, I cannot recall a single
Well,
case where.
I think you better check with the city attorney and review what Mr. McQuiston is raising, because you may very well have to restrict it to tree root.
Talk to Chris Westhoff.
Okay.
Which is probably 99% of the problem anyway. Tree root when it comes to sidewalks.
Not in Hollywood.
That
It's
wasn't my
all just
understanding when
damage.
talking with Mr.
The
Westhoff.
sidewalks are
sometimes
substandard.
sometimes it's earthquakes, sometimes it's a variety of things, but,
We'll do that, double check.
okay. I don't have a
the
problem
item?
sending this matter forward.
The only other concern we have is that the report relates to a variety of funding sources involving mitigation programs, landfill closure mitigation funds, and the only caution I would advise Bureau of Street Services to also talk to the city attorney about the legality of using some of those trust funds. Some of them are restricted, some of those are not. So we just want to make sure that when you identify, when you identify the funding sources, make sure you get clearance from the city attorney's office first.
I thought we were only talking about the 50/50 program.
Well, we are,
This
but
item.
the report is attempting to identify additional funding sources other than neighbor council funds, and it identifies a variety of trust funds that might be usable for those funding sources, but
Oh, where it says allow other sources of eligible
Correct.
funds? Okay,
Correct.
item number 2.
just a cautionary.
It's a wide open thing.
Move the item.
Okay, then the department is
Yes.
duly noting that they should work with the city attorney on this item number 2 of the recommendation. With that, this matter is approved. And Mr. McQuiston, I still would like to see that information.
I will give you the information.
Thank you.
I hope that it doesn't go to council very soon, because we don't want to have a black eye on the city by doing
You mean
something
another-
which is not legal.
Well, then it's incumbent on you to show us that information. Or
We
show
will.
us your interpretation, because my staff will research 5602 if
Yes,
we think.
I will send you the information.
Thank you. We'll also work with it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is CLA and President Joint Commission on LAUSD's reports relative to the Commission's final report. This is continued consideration of both the CLA report and the Commission's report. At your meeting, your last meeting on this item, you gave LAUSD the chance to report back on the status of the 54 recommendations that came forth from the Commission. There are 8 key recommendations that the report makes that incorporates all 54 final recommendations. We have met with LAUSD, as well as your staff has talked to LAUSD about updating the 54 recommendations. At this time, as I look at the chart, in our last chart where we looked at all the recommendations, of the 54 recommendations, actually 38 have already been implemented by LAUSD. This is in the CLA report. This is attachment 1.
I don't have it.
You don't? Should be right behind that.
So I read this whole thing for nothing. I could have just looked at this chart.
No, that's good background information.
Okay.
It's an excellent report, sir. So, did you find it, Council? Okay. So the attachment indicates of the 54, the status of the 54 recommendations that came from the President's Joint Commission on LAUSD governance. Of the 54 recommendations, 38 have been implemented and 16 have not. And we're still waiting for LAUSD to get back to us on the status of those recommendations.
The President's Joint Commission on LAUSD governance
Governance.
is the president of the board, school board.
Yeah, at that time, the then president of the school board, Jose Huizar, and our then president of City Council, Councilmember Padilla, established this commission to look at the governance structure of LAUSD to see how we could better interact with them at the time. That has been about
So
almost.
what is the recommendation for action on this?
The recommendation is to note and file it because it's for informational purposes only.
Okay.
Fine with me.
That is supported by Mr. Zine and myself.
Thank you.
That is the action of the committee. Any other items before us? No public comment.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good job.